just who is and who is not an Aboriginal person. This is going to be a big issue going forward, given the wide range of circumstances where people having a different status or a special say based on Aboriginality is only growing. Notwithstanding all the many billions in funding and special services that often eventuate these days based on Indigenous status. Now, as we know, a $1 billion gold mine in central Western New South Wales with 1,000 or so jobs in the mix has just been blocked on the basis of the representations of two Aboriginal women that the tailings dam, essential for the mine's operation, would have an impact on their culture. Today it's emerged too that a Kiwi CFMEU delegate, a former national president for 2 decades of the outlaw bikie gang The Rebels, whose visa had been revoked on character grounds, can't be deported because he somehow managed to prove Aboriginality. In 2020, in what's now known as the Love case, the High Court found that a person with Aboriginal descent, even if not born in Australia and without Australian citizenship, could not be termed an alien and therefore could not be deported from Australia. Under this precedent, Dean Martin, the uncle of AFL star Dustin Martin, has just been released from immigration detention. His case was set for court next week, but the Immigration Department has preempted that by accepting, it's reported today, further evidence proving his Aboriginal descent. Now, what that new evidence is, we don't know. We may never know, because he's now been accepted, they say, and I quote again, as a recognised member of the Mananjan Aboriginal community in Tasmania. Now, this is somewhat problematic given the widespread contention that the Aboriginal people of Tasmania were largely wiped out in the 1830s in a form of genocide. Accepting, though, that Aboriginal people have returned to Tasmania and have formed communities, it's still curious that someone born and raised in New Zealand could be one of them. So far, all we've got to go on is a ministerial spokesman's statement that the High Court's ruling meant that if immigration detainees reached certain thresholds of Aboriginality, they could not be deported. Last week, said the spokesman, the government received advice that these thresholds had been met in the Martin case. At least since the famous Mabo case, there's been a 3-part test of Aboriginality. Does a person have some Aboriginal descent? Does the person identify as Aboriginal? And is the person accepted as Aboriginal by an Aboriginal community? The danger here is that people who've never identified as Aboriginal might become Aboriginal when it's convenient. And it might often be convenient, such as when trying to avoid deportation or when trying to block a development they don't like. One of the objectors to the Blaney gold mine, Nairi Reynolds, who reportedly now describes herself, now these are her own words, not mine, as a very light-skinned descendant of a Wiradjuri woman born in the 1820s, used to describe herself as Gamilraay. She's only recently begun to describe herself as Wiradjuri, and of course, that's the mine she's objecting to, is in Wiradjuri country. Now, I've no doubt she's sincere, but if any connection, however remote, can establish Aboriginality, it's easy to see how this could become a racket. Wiradjuri elder Roy R.C., a former chair of the New South Wales Aboriginal Land Council, has publicly said that he, and I quote, has never heard of this woman, and that the mine...
My old people be rolling in their grave if they knew that our culture is being hijacked for hidden agendas, and it's not right.
Says this Wiradjuri elder, there needs to be stringent processes, he says, to determine who is Aboriginal, and that not to have one is dangerous to the real traditional owners who want economic opportunities, not locked up land.
How are we going to close the gap? The biggest killer of Aboriginal people in this country isn't alcohol and drugs. It's absolute poverty and welfare dependency. And here we got a minister that's knocking back $1 billion mine that could create economic empowerment for my people.
200%. If the term's to have any real meaning, there's got to be integrity around who is Aboriginal, who is not, and who's just using the label for their own advantage.